Hello and welcome to the Spare Change podcast. Today is the second to last day in May, and May is the national or perhaps global, unsure, but mental health awareness month. And some of the things that I talk about, while not directly, the large majority of the things I discuss as far as personal finance, economics, and all aspects of managing money and managing your personal day-to-day ability to retain income and save and produce a better future, not only in retirement, but just being able to do the things you want rather than do the things you have to. Well, a lot of those conversations are rooted in the link between mental health and personal finance, whether you own a business or you're barely scraping by on government programs. And not to stigmatize those things, because that's actually part of the conversation today, is getting away from the stigma that's attached to conversations related to money. But personally, the reason I'm interested in finance and trying to help others with their money is because I would hate to, with the knowledge that some people struggle so much with finances that they end up making that ultimate decision to end their lives. I feel uncomfortable with the idea that I've done nothing to help in some way prevent that. So to get into the bulk of today's conversation, I'm going to go through a few resources that I've been looking at, and just really have like an open discussion on finances and how they can affect your mental health if you allow them to. So one of the things that I've looked at today is the money and mental health analysis done by, let's see, I had a link up earlier, but let's see. So the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, they did a study, and basically some of the numbers they came up with, they tiered 6,000 people into a single study where they asked specific questions related to finance and how mental health problems may or may not be linked to increasingly difficult or limited access to financial tools and the ability to achieve financial goals, and day-to-day financial issues being more or less of a problem based on, do you have some sort of mental health, and how is that connected to your finances? So the 5 categories they put the participants of the study into: secure, those who are in work and in control, that made up 32%. And then if we look at the next tier, is coping, which made up 20%, people who are on a tight budget and unable to save. One of the things that I thought was interesting there is the top 32% are able to meet their basic financial needs and don't feel as though a financial issue would significantly disrupt because they have the ability to save and are taken care of in that aspect. If we look at the remaining 68%, they are unable to save, have a low income or high debt, or both, are struggling with mental health that may or may not be related to their debt, but the perception is that it's highly likely that their mental health isn't being benefited by also having debts and a lack of ability to provide for themselves and their families. And then the bottom tier is defined as sinking, which in their terms means that someone is reliant strictly on benefits and they've fallen behind overall mental health and finances. Going into more detail, so for the secure, that top 32%, they're more likely to be in work, more likely to have decent income, more likely to have a savings to fall back on, have low debts, more likely to be up to date with bills, and more likely to have less severe mental health problems. Of course, as we go down the list, coping, the next tier down, firefighting, next tier down, slipping, and that bottom tier, sinking, the issues significantly pile up, whether it's they're falling behind on their bills, or they're dealing with higher debts than they're used to, or they're out of work. And we can relate this to throughout time. In times of crisis, there's a significant increase. Most recently for the majority of us, that's COVID. You can imagine when someone has less access to work and they become sick and they don't have the same capability they used to provide for their family, to provide for themselves, and they're isolated, and that mental health starts to become a larger problem, and things start to snowball and become more and more out of control. How do we tackle those problems? When someone is at the bottom of the barrel and they've become so detached from the help that they had before, the resources they had before, the community they had before, when you go from a position of being able to take care of yourself to a position of, I don't know where my next meal is coming from, food insecurity, financial insecurity, and debt, and not even knowing where your next step is, not having a plan, not being able to meet your needs, barely getting by in a mental health, physical health, and financial and emotional health basis, it's becoming an increasing problem. And without steps or tools to push yourself in the right direction, it becomes only a bigger problem. And when there is no path or directive for you to follow, you start to follow a cycle. There's more to this than the steps, I believe, that I'm about to go through. So let's start from any point on a cycle, as described by the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. If you have mental health problems, and that's making it harder for you to earn, manage money, and spend, and to ask for help, you're going to put yourself in a position of financial difficulty. And if you have financial difficulty, that can cause stress and anxiety, which if you're not already having your needs met, can ultimately lead to mental health problems. And then the cycle just continues. So if you're coming from a standpoint of financial difficulty or mental health problems or both, it's easy to fall into a position of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. In the world of finance, that's called FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt can ultimately become such a burden in life if you don't feel confident investing your money, and you don't feel confident in your ability to earn money, you don't feel confident in your ability to manage money. How do you succeed? While success is a relative term, I think when people fall into a cycle, it's hard to know exactly how to move outward from that point. So now on the screen, I've kind of associated all of this into a cycle of not being able to confront that there is a problem and not being able to plan a way out. So if you experience pain and then you allow that pain to become something that you're avoiding consistently, and you're afraid of experiencing more pain, you're now in a cycle of fear avoidance or pain avoidance, which in aspects of finance is never going to be a helpful situation. If you can't eliminate fear and can't confront the problem, you'll never see recovery. So what I think the best thing for all of us to do is be able to have that conversation. Talk to your friends, to your family about financial issues that you face, or talk to them about things that you think you can help them with, things that you think you need help with. If you're not able to have a conversation about the problems you're facing and you just live in constant fear that you don't know essentially what you don't know, you'll never be able to confront or resolve any of those financial issues. And I think one of the biggest things that we face today is a lack of trust, not only in ourselves financially, because we've seen such big issues come into play with unemployment and the inability to work in a physical space, being detached from what was once normal and facing a new standard and new ideas, all because of something we can't see, an intangible virus that's taken over the world, or economic uncertainty based on things that are completely out of our control, like war or global supply chains. Those things have a severe impact on our ability to think rationally and decide for ourselves how to manage our day-to-day income and our ability to set aside at least some aspect of reality where instead of, well, I'm in extreme debt and I can't get out of this student loan that I blindly signed for at 18 to 20, whatever, right? When we encounter things that we're not used to, we provide such a resistance to that change that it's almost like denying that it's even happening. And being so avoidant of the types of pain that are caused by financial burdens and the discussions that you avoid when you're in a position of debt, uncertainty, fear, and doubt. There's not really a conversation to be had until we take away that stigma. It's okay to come from a position where you're not financially confident, as long as you continue to plan and build towards that idea of success, whatever that might be for you. I'm not saying you have to be filthy rich. The big idea here is get away from the mentality that you're not going to be able to do something, because there's always a way forward. And I'm not an expert. I'm not someone that comes from a place of wealth. I am simply saying, if you act in any way that is positive and directed towards an objective, and this isn't goal setting, this is planning to meet specific key tasks with measured impacts. Let's say you wanted to be able to put a down payment on a home. Well, how do you do that in a world where the housing market is such a big bad wolf and there's no resources available? I think those ideas come from a place of fear. Honestly, I do, because at the same time that the housing market was at its worst, there were still home buyers. And that's not to say that those home buyers were affluent or rich, because a lot of them weren't. I think some of the biggest steps that you can take are taking yourself out of that common mindset that things are impossible. So everyone has a different starting point. And one of the things that I've been introduced to by Brandon Childers and a few other people that are focused in psychology is the idea that everyone comes from a specific place of need, and wealth has a lot to do with that. One of the ideas is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which Brandon introduced to me, but he also introduced this concept, which is the Barrett model of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where instead of being a pyramid, there's this inflection point of transformation where you have come from a place of either survival or service, and you move towards the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So if you are in a place of survival where you're fighting for every dollar and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, and your financial stability has faced significant pain points, or you're in a place where you're not confident in your own ability to produce, retain, and manage assets, you're less capable of, maybe not less capable, but you're less advantaged in the idea that you have mobility with your finances versus someone who comes from a place of service, i.e., let's say the Bill Gates of the world, who is a philanthropist dedicated to giving back a large piece of wealth that they've attained. When you're talking about service to humanity and providing for future generations, not only of your own family, but throughout the world, that's a huge difference and a huge gap. So a lot of what I've talked about, that mental health, confidence, and financial well-being, everyone is at a different state in this hourglass shape. Someone who's making a difference and providing resources to their community might not understand what it's like to have a difficult way forward where the light's not as obvious at the end of the tunnel and all you see is darkness, where your next check isn't going to be enough to pay the bills for this month, let alone the next month, where there are people knocking at your door to take things away from you instead of provide support. I think a large part of some of the conversations I've had with Brandon, as well as some other folks in the financial and military community and just day-to-day life outside of this podcast, a lot of people really are only seeing the pain side of things, where it's like, okay, well, I have to make enough money to pay off this month's bills. I have to make enough money to be able to provide meals for my children. Those situations are vastly different from someone who's focused on, okay, well, how can I provide a business solution to assist those who are in financial need? And having the conversation allows more than one perspective on this discussion. I think people who are struggling financially should be as confident in talking about that and as capable in talking about that as someone who is coming from a place of affluence and wealth. I don't think there should be this stigma on conversations. Everyone knows what conversations you can't have when you go to a bar or a business meeting. You can't talk about what your income looks like. You can't talk about religion or politics or sex or whatever it might be. Those conversations are so taboo and they don't need to be. I think finances and mental health need to be a larger conversation, and especially considering we're in the National Mental Health Awareness Month, but we're still not having that conversation. So to really put a cap on things and wrap things up, I think the ideas that I've discussed today focus primarily on the idea that finances aren't the most conducive factor for discussion and improvement as a community. And I think that can change if we take the steps as a community to not necessarily just provide resources, but provide a forum for people to really voice, hey, these are the problems in this community where this amount of families don't know where their next meal is going to be. Or at least a better way forward is take away that awkwardness of the discussion at the lunch table or the discussion in the conference room when talking about your finances. I think it's extremely important to be able to say, hey, I don't think I'm coming from a great spot right now. I need some guidance and some help. And especially in some of the places that I've been where it's like everyone kind of makes the joke. It's like, well, we have no idea how to manage our money, and we have no idea how to write a check, and we have no idea how to properly invest or build up a retirement fund. And instead, we're just going to max out our credit cards and take out massive debts just to have that flashy car, that big, nice house that we know we can't afford. And I think those conversations need to be lessened in the idea that maybe it's time that we start realizing that we're in a position as citizens and as communities, as brothers and sisters, mothers, daughters, sons, fathers, we're in a position to change the stigma and really revitalize the conversation. If you're not educated on finances, that's okay. You just need to have those conversations. Make it known that you might not necessarily have all the information, and you might not have all the resources. That's perfectly fine. But if you're not planning and you don't have a way to plan, there's always a step forward. And I don't think that you should stay in a position where you're affected mentally by not knowing what's going on with your money, and that position of ignorance is bliss, where you don't even want to know what's going on with your money because you're in such a bad spot that you know there's a problem, but you're not willing to address it because it's hard to address. I don't think it should be hard to address. That's what I'm gonna leave with for the second to last day of Mental Health Awareness Month. And just, I think a lot of the conversation is going to be tied to finances when it comes to mental health, because someone who is not confident and able to discuss and in a position of constant fear, they're not going to have all the answers. And I think they need to be asking questions. If they're not asking questions, then someone else needs to be, because there's no shortage of people who are struggling and there's no shortage of people who are willing to help. I think there's a gap between those two communities. Feel free to ask me questions. Feel free to hold more of a discussion with me on mental health and finance. I'm always interested in those topics. I personally have stake in the game because I know people who have lost their lives to battles with depression, and a large part of that was with their finances and their ability to feel confident in where their money was. Kind of a somber topic, but I believe it's the right one to be had as of right now. Thank you for listening, and have a great day. Don't feel afraid to have those conversations.